I want to talk through a potential software engineering learning guide for 2024. So, I've been writing notes on this. I've been trying to figure out what books I would recommend, what research papers, what YouTube videos. And this that I've wrote down is a particular course of learning I think that you can take in order to advance your understanding of not programming in general, but more like on the application side of things. So this is going to cover more like understanding of scalability, understanding how data structures influence your code and also your system, and just being able to think through how does data move through your system. So to start off, I have one research paper that I would seriously recommend reading. It's called "Making Data Structures Persistent," and I found this from a lecture series on MIT's OpenCourseWare on YouTube. Which, if you haven't seen that, you got to check that series out because those videos, I mean, they're just unbelievable. Because that's the next recommendation is to go look at the dynamic programming lecture through MIT OpenCourseWare. It's on YouTube. They're very popular. I believe that paper was recommended in that video or a related video in MIT's OpenCourseWare, but I would definitely check it out because I've learned a ton from those. But that paper that paper plus the YouTube video or the really the entire lecture series, I think is going to give you a very good foundational understanding of not only obviously programming algorithms and dynamic programming in general, particularly like memoization. But I think it's going to give you an understanding as to how you can then go and look at systems and pull requests and code, and just generally things to think about as you're writing um, either concurrency statements in .NET or you're working with distributed systems, because distributed systems relies on a foundation of understanding some form of data structures, right? Because if you think about with nodes, you can think about a distributed system as like a ring, or you can think about it as like the leader with the the children nodes. And there's a number of different ways you can think about it, but I think those two resources are helpful. The third one is really two of them again, but it's acing the system design interview and also web scalability for the startup engineer. Acing the system design interview heavily references web scalability for the startup engineer, but if you read them both at the same time or one after another, I mean, I'm finishing up web scalability for the startup engineer right now, and I mean, it's a wealth of information, but it also has an excellent collection of book recommendations and research papers. So if you're looking for more sources on that kind of stuff, web scalability has a great collection of that, and it references those throughout the text. So I would look at those two because I think those right after you come off reading, or learning about data structures, I think that looking at your system from just coming from the context of looking at data structures is going to make a lot of sense, especially as you think about adding nodes into, let's say, a RabbitMQ cluster or a Redis cluster. I think it's just going to be helpful to think about. And also, it's going to be helpful to think about ideas like replication, immutability, read replicas even, and also eventual consistency. So I think that there's a lot of things that are formed off of data structures that I think are going to come to light in those two things. So that's what I wrote down. I would say the next jump after that for me, I would read Concurrency in .NET, because this goes into extreme detail about the TPL library in .NET. So the task parallel library. So these are things like parallel for each, uh, their concurrent code. It talks about parallelism, concurrency, and it talks about functional programming with propagator blocks, cancellation tokens, immutability. It talks about so many things. But one call I want to talk about in particular is very unique uses of the select statement, um, and other things in LINQ, that I think are overlooked, because I think it's easy to use select and create kind of like your intermediary data structure, and it goes into a topic called uh, deforestation. And I think that its detail about more obscure topics like that stem from, again, data structures. So I think that once you've looked at all that stuff, jumping into concurrency in .NET is going to make a lot of sense because you just looked at those resources. So I'm not really doing a good job explaining it. You got to go and read it yourself and see. But it's definitely a book that I have marked a lot of pages on, and I have a lot of sticky notes to show me. But it's one of those books that, like, I'll go and reference to, like, find or to figure out what the syntax is, and that's gonna bug me. What the what statement am I thinking of? I don't know. I'll come back to it if I remember. So after you've read Concurrency in .NET, I would then look at a book called Microservice Design Patterns in .NET, and that book in particular it, it's extremely good, and it's very concise too, which is what I like about it. And it does a very, very good job at articulating concepts like messaging, how to connect to RabbitMQ, and also just use raw SQL. And I think that it presents it in a concise way, and I've struggled to find other resources that do it concisely and that makes sense. And I like its approach to messaging, and I think messaging is going to make sense coming off of reading about concurrency, because that's really the same, like, kind of frame of mind that you'd be thinking about that in. So I checked that out. It's a shorter book. It's very, very good. I've read it once, and I've looked at it or flipped through it a couple times. So it's a really, really good resource, especially as you are just getting into RabbitMQ or messaging in general. Dapper, .NET is a ton of concepts in there that I think are really good. So after you have read that, my next recommendation is going to be a little bit more generic. It's going to be a little bit more, like, questionable probably for some people, but it's ASP.NET Core 5 and React. That's the name of the book. And that one is that one I recommend for one reason, to be honest with you. I think that book does a very good job at explaining how to include React in a .NET app, and it talks through not only the template that Visual Studio provides you to build React with .NET, but it explains it. And I feel like that, for whatever, maybe it's just me, but I feel like that is a little bit harder thing to look up, because, if you see the template to make a .NET web app with a React front end, that's a template you can select in Visual Studio. You select it and it's done for you. But it never explains, like, how it's done. So this book goes into, obviously, .NET and React, but it joins the two together, and I like how it explains how that is done. And it's a little bit dated, right? ASP.NET Core 5, we're on .NET 8, moving into 9, but long-term support is .NET 8. So it's a little bit dated, but a lot of the stuff I think still applies. There's a couple hot takes in the book, like, I think the author uses, he calls stored procedures on the database from his Dapper queries, but again, that's okay in some cases. In some cases, it makes it easier. In some cases, it might make it more difficult. But that to me doesn't bother me, because, like, I can see a use case for that. I don't know. Some people have opinions about it, but that book is really good. It's pretty big. It's more of like a tutorial type book. But again, that connection for React and .NET is, I don't know. I just liked it. I thought I did a good job. So now that we've kind of covered all that, the next book that I would recommend, because it moves right off of, messaging is RabbitMQ in depth. This book is phenomenal. If you're trying to learn a lot about RabbitMQ, I would seriously put a lot of time into studying this book. I mean, it explains the protocol, AMQP. It explains what RabbitMQ is, all the configuration you can do, custom plugins, date delivery modes, message properties, headers. I mean, it explains practically everything you need to know, and I think it's going to give you a very good understanding as you incorporate RabbitMQ into your system. So check it out. It's not very long. It's pretty concise. Again, it's like what is it, like 200-ish pages? So it's not super long, but it's just, if you work with RabbitMQ, this book is going to be, I think, amazing, because it explains it so well, and it explains what is actually happening when you publish a message to an exchange, and then and it explains that it has a couple really, really good pictures about the publishing, the acknowledgments, what's happening with the messages, and it's just very good. But it also goes into the tuning of the performance. So an example is you can set a prefetch count, but it talks about like the performance tuning you can get based on like what you're trying to achieve. So if you set a super high prefetch count, what are the implications of that in RabbitMQ? And it talks about if you require an acknowledgement, what does that do for performance? So it goes into all the performance tuning, and honestly, it's just a very good reference guide, because those are some of the stuff that's a little harder to find. So I think it makes sense to read it then, because now you've gotten RabbitMQ set up in a project, so now you can read about it in depth. The next one is going to be effective .NET memory management. This one is the same author as the Microservice Design Patterns in .NET, Trevor Williams. I'm gonna write all these in the description with the authors. So, but this book is phenomenal. I mean, memory management is a very difficult topic in programming. .NET, we have the advantage of the garbage collection, but this one really goes in depth as to what's happening. But it also includes, I think, the rare thing of best practice and things to look for. And it also includes things to look for in code reviews, which I think is phenomenal. And so that book's excellent. I check it out, and I think it makes sense to read it there, because when you connect to RabbitMQ, you have to choose a couple things. You have to either create a persistent connection like Mass Transit does, and it'll just basically keep the connection alive to your Rabbit server. Or you can do some kind of polling, mechanism, like you can check it every, second or so. But each of these has memory implications, and you want to check for have you disposed of your resources correctly, especially if you are creating your own client from scratch to connect to RabbitMQ. You're going to want to make sure you handle that correctly. So reading memory management after that, I think, makes sense. The next one is dependency injection. This book, it's just called Dependency Injection. It's by Manning Publishers. Again, I'll have it included in the description. And I'm not including links, right? I'm not. This is my recommendations based on what I've read. So I'm not including links to some Amazon thing, because I'm not. No, this is just, I'm gonna write them out because there's no affiliate thing, right? So these are just gonna be my recommendations. Take it for what it's worth. But dependency injection, excellent resource. It goes into more detail on dependency injection than you probably ever want to know. But it helps, I think, give words to what dependency injection is, and it really talks about what is actually happening in .NET with dependency injection, because it's for .NET, and it talks about .NET's built-in dependency injection handler, and it does it in a way where I think it helps make sense when you think about it. But the reason I have it after memory management is because when you understand what the new keyword is doing, I think that the memory management perspective is going to help shed more light on why dependency injection is important. So I think that that's why I have the place there. The last one is up for debate as to what position it should be in, but it's literally like any version of Sam's Teach Yourself sequel. This book is like, I would think it's like the go-to reference manual for SQL at this point. And I read this. I got it for like $2 or $3 on Amazon years ago. And I mean, the stuff doesn't go out of date. I mean, the SQL pretty much stays the same mostly, right? I mean, I'm talking about like just your selects, where, joins, subselects, store procedures, mainstream SQL things. I'm not getting into the differences between different database engines and things like that. You'll have to just look that up as you kind of go. But as long as you have a core foundation of general SQL, that should get you pretty far, right? And this manual just, again, it's something that you'll probably read and then you'll probably flip back to as you try to remember the specific SQL syntax for a particular join or anything really, because I feel like that stuff, I feel like I always forget SQL like syntax. I mean, it's kind of floating in my mind, or like, something like regex is, right? Does anyone really know regex? I mean, but SQL, I always have to flip back to a reference manual. That one super cheap. I would say, like, I wouldn't even. You can get the newer versions. They're a little bit more expensive. I don't know if it's worth the money to get newer versions. I generally try to find my books either at the library. If the library doesn't have them, I'll go to Amazon and see what used options there are, because the older versions of this book used are super cheap, right? They're like, I got mine, it was like $3 with like $1 shipping or something crazy like that. But some of the other ones, unfortunately, are like $50 or $60. I would check your library to see if they have it. I've gotten a few of these at the library, which has been really, really good. But a lot of them I've had to get online. But it pays off. I think it pays off because you become a little bit better at your job. You'll be able to negotiate, I think, your salary and get offers and things like that. So I think it kind of pays off down the road. So that's my kind of guide. That's everything I had in the list. You can add to, I would just say make the list for yourself, and then just see where you're at. This one in particular, I think it makes sense because I think it all builds on each other, at least in my opinion. Now, I didn't read these in this order myself, but if I were to go back and do that, I think that this is a logical way to go about doing that. Now, this might take a year to get through all these, and I think that's really the intent, right? Is you're not going to read all this in a month, right? Like, so I would just plan for, like, 2025 is almost here. We have 12 months, and just say, what book am I going to read each month? So here is like, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. There's like 11 or 12 of them right there. So you could read one of these a month. It's honestly 10 pages a day, and you read a book a month. So it's programming books. A lot of them are very dry. It's just the nature of software. It's not very exciting. But as you kind of delve more into what I would call the niche technologies, I think it becomes a little bit more interesting because you'll be thinking of ideas of how to incorporate the more the more obscure things into, more of your mainstream system design. And I think that that's where a lot of the unique solutions come from, is using things that have not really been well researched or documented, and just testing and trying to figure things out. And I think that that's where a lot of good ideas and solutions come from. So yeah, let me know your thoughts, or let me know if you have any other um, book suggestions in general, or have created your own guide for a year. So um, yeah, hopefully this is helpful. I'm gonna try to make a list of like all the books I think that I've read, and I'm going to especially try to at least lay out for myself which ones I want to read in 2025. So when I do that, I'll probably post it somewhere. So anyway, thank you all for watching. I'll see you in the next one.